Hi, David here from Help at Maths, and today's video is to help parents teach their children how to add in columns using the techniques that we use in school to really help children to understand what to do. We're going to start with a very simple example and then do a couple of more complicated examples. And so in this instance, we're looking at 765 add 24. So the first thing to get your child to realise is they have to line up those digits correctly. The ones have to go with the ones, the tens have to go with the tens, the hundreds have to go with the hundreds, and so on. And often it's very useful to write the column headings like that so the child can understand why they're putting which digit where. Because they need to realise that a 4 in the ones column is a very different value to a 4 in the tens column. The next thing you need to realise is it's very important that your child can look at this in a concrete form, make the number in some way. In this example, we're making the number 765 using place value discs, and I thoroughly recommend, if you're doing maths at home with your child, that you get some of these. And I've put a link in the description so you can see where to get hold of some. They're really cheap and useful for all the calculations you're going to do. We start by adding the ones, the digit on the furthest on the right hand side, the least significant digit. Then we add the next column, which are the tens, so we've got 2 tens to add to there, and we've got no hundreds to add in this example. And then we count them up, see how many ones that we've got. So we end up with 9 ones. See how many tens that we have. So 6 tens add 2 tens gave us 8 tens, and how many hundreds we have. We didn't add any hundreds, so the hundred value will be the same, and the answer is 789. So 3 principles covered there. Number 1, line up the digits properly. Number 2, make the number with concrete apparatus, and I cannot stress enough the importance of that step when a child's learning how to do maths. And number 3, you start adding from the digits that are furthest on the right hand side. Okay, now we're going to look at a slightly more complicated example. 765 add 828. Same as before, we line up the digits correctly and we make the first number 765. Now we're going to add the ones, which are the digits furthest on the right hand side in this example. So we've got 5 ones, add 8 ones. We end up with 13 ones, but the problem is we've got too many now for the column, because the next principle your child needs to realise is you can't have more than 9 numbers in one column. You can't have more than 9 digits in one column. You can't have more than 9 discs in one column. You have to start using the next column if you go over 10. In this example, we've got 10 and 3, 13. And now the most important principle of all for your child to realise, we're going to exchange 10 ones for 1 10. This is the most important principle of all, because if your child understands this in a concrete way, they will understand the rest of calculation very easily. They need to realise that the value hasn't changed, it's just written differently, it's represented differently to make it easier to do the calculation. So now we can group all of the ones together and the tens together and the hundreds together and add them very easily. So here we're going to shift the 10 into the tens column now, where it belongs, and see that we've still got the original number plus the 8 that we added. So we did 5 add 8 was 13. That was 1 10 and 3 ones. And that is why we moved the 10 across to the tens column. In fact, to make it crystal clear, you could even move the 10 that we carried underneath where we've carried the digit 1, which is actually 1 10. So you can see that we've got 6 tens now and the 1 10 that we carried. Next, we're going to add the 2 tens. And so we now will end up with 9 tens in the tens column, because we started with 6 tens, we carried a 10 over, and then we added 2 tens, giving us a total of 9 tens altogether. Finally, we're going to use the same principle to add the hundreds. It doesn't matter what column it's in. If you go over 10 in that column, you have to exchange. In this example, we've got 15 hundreds. Now, 10 hundreds are the same as 1,000. So, and again, we're using the principle of exchanging now. We're going to exchange 10 100s for 1,000. We're exchanging 10 discs and replacing it with 1 disc that goes in the next column, which is 10 times bigger. So here we had 15 discs, 15 hundreds, in other words, 1,000 500. And we end up with the answer 1,593. And again, I cannot overemphasize enough the importance of actually making these numbers and doing the exchanging with the concrete apparatus. It's worth taking the time. If you just do it abstract, if you just do the written calculation, your child won't be able to visualize what's going on, and it will take a lot longer to teach them how to do it. Get them to make it, and they'll get it in a few attempts. This method also works with decimals, by the way, so we could have 76.5, add 82.8. You still just make sure that the digits are lined up correctly like before. You need to make sure that the decimal points are aligned. You also need to make sure that the column headings are correct and your child understands what those numbers are. So in this example now, the 7 is in the tens column, the 6 is in the ones column, and the 5 is now in the tenths column, because 0.1 is the same as 1/10. But we could still add it up using the same algorithm as before. You've got to be careful when lining up decimals sometimes, because you might have a different number of decimal places after the number. So in this example now, we've got 7.65, add 82.8. So we start by writing our first number like before, 7.65, but now we've got to add the 82.8, and we've got to make sure everything lines up. So we're just going to label our ones, also called units, which is why we write a U, our tenths and our hundredths. And we need to show our tens column because we're adding 82.8. So that digit 8 has to go in the tens column, the 2 has to go in the ones column, and the 8 belongs in the tenths column. There aren't any hundredths mentioned in this number, but to make it more visual, you can always put a place value holder in. We can put a 0 on the end to show that there are no hundredths. So now we've got 5 hundredths, we've got 14 tenths, which is the same as 1 whole 1, and 4 tenths. So we carry the 1 to the ones column. We then add the ones to get 10 ones. So we had to carry the 10, and then we end up with 90.45 altogether. To help your child visualize the decimal calculation, you can still use discs for this. You can turn over the tens, for instance, and pretend they're tenths. You can turn over the hundreds and pretend they're hundreds, for example. That's one way that you could do that. Also, this algorithm works with numbers no matter how large, doesn't matter how long the number is, could go on to infinity. The same method works. You just add up the numbers, and if it goes over 10, you have to carry to the next column. And that is how you add numbers in columns, but also that is how you can teach it effectively to your child. So the principles we covered there were as follows. Number 1, you have to make sure that your digits are lined up correctly, and you can use column headings to help your child do that. Number 2, you need to make the number using apparatus so your child can visualize what's going on. Number 3, you start adding with the numbers which are least significant, the ones that are furthest on the right-hand side, which is often the ones, but not always. You might be adding decimals, for example. Then you need to add the numbers in each of the columns, and if it goes over 10, you have to exchange and move the digit into the next column. And again, it's really worth doing this with apparatus so your child can understand why they're doing it, and the fact that you haven't changed the value of the calculation, you just changed the way you represented it to make it easier to do. And the same principle works whether you're doing decimals or you're doing really, really large numbers. That is how you add numbers. So I hope that was really useful. And if you're going to remember just one thing from this lesson, it is to make the number with apparatus like coins, and that will really help your child to understand.